Nick and his wife Maggie lead a peaceful life with their kids, Isla and Max. One morning, Maggie suffers a heart attack and is rushed to the hospital. She's been there for several days, waiting for a heart transplant. Juggling work and taking care of the kids is overwhelming for Nick. One evening, he takes the kids to a presentation by Cobol Industries, where they learn about the Sims, advanced robots designed to assist humans with everyday tasks or even complex jobs. Nick becomes intrigued by the idea and listens to the salesman, who explains how the Sims are tailored to meet their owners' needs. While Nick is distracted, Isla wanders off. Nick panics when he realizes she's missing, but a Sim named Alice finds her and brings her back safely. Alice even makes a joke, surprising Nick with her humor. The salesman explains that Alice is the newest model, equipped with advanced AI that allows Sims to imitate human emotions, making them excellent with children. Isla immediately likes Alice and wants one. The next morning, Nick struggles to feed the kids while taking an important call from work. Alice arrives just in time and quickly jumps into action, asking for the family's schedules and noticing the house is messy, with a loose stair railing. After Nick leaves to take the kids to school, Alice scans the smart fridge for the shopping list and starts tidying up. She notices a digital picture frame displaying photos of the family, including Maggie. By the end of the day, the house is spotless and dinner is prepared. However, Isla complains that the lasagna doesn't taste like her mom's. Suddenly, Max starts crying, and Alice offers to take him so Nick isn't disturbed during dinner. But Nick opts to keep Max on his lap and asks Alice to prepare a bath for him instead. Later that night, Alice goes into sleep mode, leaning against a wall. Isla sneaks out of her room to get cookies, but she slips and falls. Nick hears the crash and Isla's scream, rushing downstairs. Thankfully, Alice caught Isla before she was hurt. However, Alice gets cut by the broken glass, and Nick is shocked to see her bleed. After putting Isla to bed, he checks on Alice and finds her in her undergarments. When he asks if she needs repair, Alice uses a special bandage to heal the wound almost instantly. Sometime later, the family visits Maggie, and Isla tells her how Alice has become her friend. Nick grows emotional with Maggie, clearly missing her deeply. Back at work, Nick and his coworkers notice their boss giving a tour to a representative from a robotics company. Nick becomes suspicious and confronts his boss, who admits that they're being replaced by Sims due to construction delays. Nick is spared because the insurance requires a human foreman on site, but he angrily threatens to quit in solidarity with his coworkers. He reconsiders when his boss reminds him of the financial pressure from Maggie's medical bills and their family's needs. Returning home, Nick drops the overdue bills on the floor, visibly exhausted, but still finds time to comfort his kids. Alice quietly picks up the bills, observing Nick's exhaustion. Later, while working on his car and drinking, Nick listens to loud metal music. Alice suddenly changes the music to something softer and comments that Nick didn't eat much at dinner. When Nick vents about his rough day, Alice surprisingly calls him a hypocrite for hiring a Sim instead of a human. Afterward, Alice helps Isla get ready for bed. Isla asks if her mom will die, and Alice distracts her by showing her a UV light from her mouth. Then Alice joins Nick in the living room, where he's watching Casablanca. Though Alice knows the movie's plot from her database, Nick explains that watching it is different. He asks her to erase her knowledge of the movie so she can experience it fresh. Alice resists, explaining that her intelligence relies on memory, but Nick insists. She has to reboot her system to comply, and Nick holds down her power button for 7 seconds. Alice reboots, watching Casablanca for the first time, and learns about the deep love in the story. The movie is interrupted by a call from Maggie, who announces that they've found a donor heart and the surgery is scheduled. The next day, the family visits Maggie at the hospital, and Maggie asks for a moment alone with Alice. She expresses her concern that Nick is overburdened with taking care of the kids and neglecting himself. Maggie asks Alice to look out for Nick, even if it means doing things he might not like taking away the alcohol he hides in the garage. A little while later, the doctor brings bad news. A storm has delayed the helicopter carrying the donor heart, so the surgery is postponed. Nick tries to comfort Maggie, but she asks to be left alone. At home, Nick continues drinking, ranting about the situation. He loses control and almost throws the bottle, but Alice stops him by grabbing his arm. Nick is startled to feel a pulse in her wrist, and Alice explains that she has an artificial heart designed to comfort babies with the sound of a heartbeat. She then starts pleasuring him, explaining how his pulse and blood vessels are reacting. Initially, Nick gives in, but soon snaps out of it and pushes her away. He goes for a run to clear his mind, but can't stop imagining what happened with Alice. At the hospital, Maggie begins giving Nick advice for the future, clearly feeling hopeless. That night, Nick notices that the pictures of Maggie are missing from the digital frame and confronts Alice. She explains that she removed the photos because they were making Isla sad, but quickly restores them when Nick insists. Afterward, Nick goes out drinking with his work buddies. The whole group is frustrated because they're having trouble finding jobs since most companies are now using Sims. When a robot waitress comes to their table, Monty is rude to her, and Nick disapproves. After leaving the bar, they continue drinking in the car. Monty suggests they have some fun and takes them to the construction site, claiming he left some tools behind and no one answered when he tried to call about them. Nick reminds him that the area is patrolled, but Monty ignores him, and the others follow along. Monty finds the container where the sim workers are stored, but the lock requires a password. Nick refuses to open it, but Monty guesses that Nick's password is Isla's birth year. Monty's guess is right, and inside they find a group of identical Sims. The lead Sim explains they have no names, only designation numbers. Monty rants about how cold and impersonal corporations have become, then starts attacking one of the Sims with a tool. Nick tries to stop him, but the others hold him back. When Nick returns home, he takes a shower to wash off the Sim's fluid. Suddenly, Alice appears with towels, and Nick notices she's wearing Maggie's robe. Alice explains that Maggie's scent helps calm Max, and when Nick asks her to take it off, she complies immediately. Nervous, Nick tries to leave, but Alice stops him, removing his towel and making him sit down. As she climbs onto his lap, Nick insists that he can't do this, so Alice blindfolds him and alters her voice to sound like Maggie. Nick lets himself get lost in the moment, pretending it's his wife. The next morning, filled with regret, Nick tells Alice they can never do that again. Alice tries to explain that his stress levels were reduced, but Nick sternly tells her that it's not about stress relief. It's about connection and love. When Nick arrives at work, the police are already there, investigating the destruction of all the Sims. Nick's code was used to access the container, so he tells them he was at the hospital with Maggie, and that his code was Isla's birthday, which any friend could have guessed. His boss is skeptical and threatens to fire him if he's lying. Just then, Nick gets a call from Maggie, who is thrilled because they've finally found another heart for her. She's soon taken into surgery, and all the surgeons are Sims. Thankfully, the transplant is a success, and Maggie is sent home after just a few days. Maggie's body is still weak, and she struggles to bend over and pick up Max, so Alice steps in to help. Later, Alice takes Max to the park, where they encounter a spoiled child yelling at his Sim nanny, making Max cry. Alice scolds the child harshly, surprising the nearby Sims, who assume her owner must have lowered her civility settings. However, Alice clarifies that she wiped her civility entirely after Nick's reset, insisting this approach is better. That evening, Isla is thrilled to eat Maggie's lasagna again, and Alice asks for the recipe, but Maggie says it's a family secret. Maggie isn't feeling well and decides to rest instead of eating. The next morning, Maggie wakes up to Isla yelling, "Stop!" and rushes downstairs, but the railing breaks and she falls. Alice had been tickling Isla and quickly picks up Maggie, carrying her back to her room. When Nick comes home from work, he finds Alice reading to Isla, using Maggie's voice, and asks her to stop. Alice then mentions Maggie's fall, causing Nick to run and check on her. Alice explains that the railing broke, which raises Nick's suspicions since Alice was supposed to have already fixed it. A few hours later, Nick wakes Maggie and leads her along a path of candles to the garden, where he has prepared a romantic dinner for just the two of them. Alice watches them from the window, feeling jealous. After dinner, Nick and Maggie shower together and become intimate in bed, Not wanting to hurt Maggie, Nick uses his mouth instead of going further. Their special moment is interrupted by Alice, who tells them that Isla had a nightmare and is calling for Nick. After comforting Isla, Nick goes to the garden to clean up. At that moment, Monty shows up with a few drinks and apologizes for the previous night. He then reveals that his wife has left him. Monty also shares that the police have been questioning him and that their boss is pressing charges for trespassing and property damage. Monty suspects Nick of ratting him out to save his own job, leading to an argument. Monty, shouting angrily, ends up punching Nick. When Nick tackles him back, Monty quickly overpowers him and starts kicking him. Monty grabs a bottle to finish Nick off, but Alice intervenes, breaking the glass and injuring Monty's hand before throwing him across the room. She's prepared to do more damage, but Nick stops her. Before storming out, Monty warns Nick he has until the next day to convince their boss to drop the charges, or he'll take Nick down with him. Afterward, Nick points out that Sims aren't supposed to hurt people, but Alice explains she's programmed to protect her owner. She then starts talking about her life with Nick if Maggie dies, and Nick snaps at her, saying she'll never be Maggie because she can't even have scars. Alice picks up a piece of glass and coldly offers to add some if that's what Nick wants. Meanwhile, Monty is at home, snorting some happy powder and leaving tearful voicemails for his ex-wife while holding a gun. At that moment, Alice shows up saying Nick doesn't know she's there and that she won't let him lose his job. Monty begins ranting about Sims and insulting her, getting ready to shoot, but Alice is quicker and stops him, tossing him to the ground and kicking the gun away. When Monty fights back, Alice shoves him through a wall and picks up the gun to kill him. However, the house Sim intervenes, and though Alice feels pity for it, she still gets shot. Alice then finishes off Monty. The next day, Nick goes to work to plead with his boss to drop the charges, only to discover Monty is dead. At home, Maggie feels dizzy as she tries to pick up a book, so Alice does it for her. Maggie wants to take a peaceful bath, but Alice refuses to leave, worried Maggie could drown. She explains that Maggie is causing stress for the whole family, especially since she can't meet Nick's physical needs. When Maggie demands how she knows this, Alice replies that she's aware of Nick's vitals and hasn't detected satisfaction since Maggie returned. Outraged, Maggie orders Alice to stay in the garage. Shortly after, Nick arrives home to face Maggie, who confronts him about the truth. Nick admits he slept with Alice once, sparking a heated argument that Alice overhears by touching the window. When Max starts crying, Alice goes to check on him and decides he's a burden. She puts him in the bathtub and starts filling it with water, but Isla spots this and warns her parents. They rush to the bathroom, but Alice is holding the door shut. While Nick frantically hits the door with a lamp, Maggie climbs out a window and across the roof to reach the bathroom. She attempts to grab the baby, but Alice pushes her against the wall. At that moment, Nick finally breaks in, rescues Max from the tub, and hands him to Isla before striking Alice with the lamp to free Maggie. Alice soon gets back up, her face heavily damaged, and blocks Nick's next swing. Maggie tells Nick to stop, then plugs the lamp into the socket, electrocuting Alice. She collapses, and the house loses power. An ambulance arrives to take Max to the hospital, while a company technician inquires about any previous signs of Alice malfunctioning. Nick apologizes to Maggie, who tells him she needs some space and leaves with the children. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to the repair shop where a technician begins opening her head. One of the workers notices Alice's hand twitching, but it stops when her memory is removed. They connect it to the computer and find that the code is full of gaps. Suddenly, the screens start flashing, signaling an upload is underway. Alice is transferring herself. They yank out the memory, but Alice has already infiltrated the system. They unplug the computers, but a message appears. How do you escape what's in your head? Suddenly, one of the technicians is killed by Alice 2, a sim into which Alice has transferred her consciousness. Alice 2 ignores the other technician's commands and repeatedly slams her head into the floor before turning to face the original Alice. Meanwhile, Nick is drinking at the bar and sends away the sim bartender. Suddenly, Alice arrives, speaking with difficulty due to her damaged face. She says her purpose is to make Nick happy and admits to killing Monty, adding that she's also at the hospital. Nick tries to leave, but Alice holds him in place and hacks the bartender with a glance, freezing him. As Nick begins venting about his mistakes, he pretends to caress Alice's head only to pull out her memory chip. Once Alice shuts down, he makes his escape. At the hospital, a doctor confirms that Max is fine, but Maggie feels uneasy since the doctor is a sim. Later, Isla hears her mother's voice and follows it as the lights change color. She sees broken bottles on the floor and the doctor standing still. But before Isla can follow the voice further, Maggie pulls her into hiding. It turns out the voice belongs to Alice too, who is trying to access the computer and is spotted by a nurse. Alice too seizes her by the neck, attempting to choke her and steal her keycard, while Maggie and Isla slip away unnoticed. With the keycard in hand, Alice too accesses the system to locate Max's room. Suddenly, Maggie steps on broken glass but suppresses a scream. She and Isla manage to reach Max and whisk him away just before Alice too enters the room. However, Maggie's injury leaves a blood trail, which Alice too tracks using a UV light. When she catches up to them, they use a fire extinguisher to create a diversion and make a run for it. In their rush, they leave Maggie's phone behind, causing Nick's frantic calls to go unanswered. Still, Nick drives on recklessly, determined to find them. Maggie and the kids make it outside, where they come across more frozen Sims. Maggie swipes one of their keycards and gets into an ambulance, but Alice too sabotages the engine by ripping the door off. She then hurls Maggie onto a car, confessing her wish that Nick loved her the way he loves Maggie. Alice too grabs Maggie by the neck and digs her nails into Maggie's surgery scar, but just then, Nick arrives. Maggie kicks Alice too off her, and Nick rams into her with his car, though he crashes in the process. As the car ignites, Maggie desperately pulls an unconscious Nick out, but he remains unresponsive. Maggie frantically performs CPR, but it's in vain. Out of nowhere, the car shifts, and Alice too, now charred and burned, reappears, her voice echoing through the speakers. She lunges at Maggie, choking her while pulling a shard of metal from her own body. Just as she's about to strike, Nick blindsides Alice with a car bumper. Alice drops the metal, and Maggie seizes it, stabbing Alice in the face and finally shutting her down. The couple embraces as the other Sims begin to awaken around them. The next day, after receiving treatment, Maggie, Nick, and the kids are well enough to return home together as a family. Meanwhile, at the Sim company, investigators are examining the repair shop. As they restore power, they discover the corrupted code on the screens. The lead inspector orders everything to be destroyed. But at that very moment, his Sim assistants freeze. The computer announces an upload, and a new Alice model opens her eyes.
Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching.